Hello, today we're going to talk about fat quarters. What exactly is a fat quarter and why would you need to use one? Let's talk about it. Okay, so when you go to buy fabric for a project, you're generally going to go to a fabric store or another place like Walmart or a little quilting shop where they often have large like wall spaces where there's just bolts and bolts of different types of fabric, and they usually have a section of pre-cuts or fat quarters. So these are what they look like. They're just little panels, little squares of fabric, and you can usually like pick and choose and put them in complementary little piles or stacks and so on and so forth from there. They typically range in price from about $2.99 to 99 cents depending on where you're going to buy them. At Joann's they're usually $2.99, but they do go on sale for 99 cents, which is a pretty fair price for a fat quarter. So let's look at a fat quarter and say, what is a fat quarter? So fat quarters actually come in some different sizes. They're I would say semi-standard, that being that some are 18 by 22, some are 18 by 21. This one here, for example, is an 18 by 21 fat quarter. So if you're doing a project and the instructions call for X amount of fat quarters that are 18 by 20, make sure that you are reading that, or at least measuring when you get home, so that you know what size fabric you're looking at. But we're going to say 18 by 22. That's what we're going to, this particular one is actually 18 by 21, but we're going to use the measurement of 18 by 22 for these purposes. So a fat quarter is basically just that. It's a standard panel of fabric. It's a single width. It's not, doubled where there's a fold or anything. And the advantage is that it's really easy to work with if you're making small crafts or you're quilting. It's just much easier to deal with this little piece of fabric. So that being said, let's look at something really quick. So fat quarters. I bought this fat quarter, I'm pretty sure, for 99 cents. So pretty good price, 99 cents you'd think, for the 18 by 22 length. I'm a teacher and everything I do has to really be on a budget. So I'm going to show you how I get my fat quarters on a budget. So this here is an example of some yardage that I bought. These are just quilting fabrics. They're not fat quarters. I bought these off the bolt. Now I bought each of these at a half yard, and I'll explain why. So the nice thing about buying your fabric off a bolt and making your own fat quarters is, number one, you're not going to have to run through all the entire store's selection of fat quarters trying to find, oh, I need, 10 of these and I need 6 of these. Maybe they don't have 6, so you have to go see if there's another Walmart or Joann's or Hobby Lobby or whatever you can get 2 or 3 more because you need, X amount of each type of fat quarter. That can kind of be a pain in the behind. Let's just admit it. So if you're getting them off the bolt, you can kind of get however many you need for your project. So if you're doing a quilt that requires 21 fat quarters and you know that you need 3 different colors, you can just get your fabric in as much fabric as you need to make 1/3 of that amount in each of the fabrics. So let's have a look at one of these. Now, you may have noticed I said I bought half yards, but we're talking about fat quarters, right? And the fat quarter is basically, well, a regular quarter yard is basically 9 inches. So this is your quarter yard, 9 inches here, 9 inches in width by 22 inch or 44 inches in length. So here's your 9 inches. So that's a quarter yard, and then 44 inches to sometimes 42 inches in length. So how does that work with a fat quarter? Well, what a fat quarter actually is it's still that same little panel of fabric, the 9 by, say, 44, except for it's cut in a different configuration. So instead of 9 inches, it's going to be 18. So it's double the width here, and it's half the length. So it is 18 by 22 instead of 9 by 44. So here is my half yard. Let me move my fat quarters out of the way. So this is a half yard of fabric, and we're talking about my 18 inches in width here by 44 inches in length. Now I got this fabric on sale because I do look for the sale prices. This half yard cost me just about $2. It was a hair under. $2 for this half yard of fabric. Now if I were to cut this in half this way, lengthwise, so instead of 44 inches, it's now 22 inches and 22 inches. I now have a fat quarter up there at 22 by 18 and a fat quarter down here, 22 by 18, but this is also double when you buy off the bolt. So instead of 2 fat quarters, I got 4 fat quarters out of this half yard cut of fabric at $2 for the half yard. So my 4 fat quarters are 50 cents a piece. 50 cents for 4, 99 cents on sale for 1. Or if you were to buy it regular price at Joann's, for example, $3 for 1 fat quarter versus $2 for 4 fat quarters. So budget-wise, it's actually a lot cheaper to just buy the half yards and make your own fat quarters. And again, like I said, there are endless combinations of complementary colors, and I'm not digging around hoping to find the right number of fat quarters in each individual type of fabric pattern that I want. So there's a budget-friendly way to achieve fat quarters. And it's really easy to make them. I actually, when I'm making my fat quarters out of my yardage, I'm a cross hobbyist, so I can do 2 things at once. I also absolutely love to fish. I am a bass angler, so I'm often doing this busy work, cutting fat quarters and whatnot while I'm watching Major League Fishing on TV. Yes, that's a thing, Major League Fishing. It's usually about 3 hours long, and I just sit there and work on my fabric, so I cross-craft. Okay, so what's the purpose of using fat quarters? Why wouldn't you just use a big yardage to begin with? Well, first of all, there are a lot of ways to use fat quarters. When you are doing things, there's huge books and patterns and things that are just fat quarter friendly. So they're smaller projects, and as we said earlier, it's much easier to manage and manipulate a smaller piece of fabric when you're doing smaller projects. So you can get huge quantities available online or in bookstores of fat quarter friendly patterns, crafts, and different things that you can do. So that's one nice way to use fat quarters. When you use fat quarters, you can also, you're pretty much using most of the fat quarter oftentimes. You're not having as much leftover pieces. If I was going to cut a half yard of fabric, for example, and yay big, and I just cut a little corner out, I now have this odd size piece of fabric that I have to try to remember isn't a full yard or half yard anymore because I've cut this, 9 by 9 square or whatever. But when you're using fat quarters, that's a lot less of a problem. Another reason to use fat quarters are fat quarter friendly quilts. This is a book that I got, and it says Turning 20, basically because the smaller quilt size in here, which I believe is like a twin size quilt, uses about 20 fat quarters. So when you're getting the pattern and you're looking at it, tells you need basically 20 fat quarters for this. Or if you're doing the next size up, you might need 30 to 40 fat quarters, or you might need 30 to 50 fat quarters or whatever, depending on the size of the quilt that you're making. Which is nice because then you know exactly how many fat quarters you need. So that's very helpful. And you can kind of do the math in your head if you don't want to cut it into fat quarters. If a half yard makes 4 fat quarters times X amount of fat quarters that I need X amount of yards. So you can also just use regular size fabric as well. Here's another idea, another crafting idea. Love to make these mug rugs and give them out as gifts. These are also great to use with fat quarters. Smaller projects, you're not dealing with as much, fabric to manipulate around as you're trying to cut and find your different measurements and sizes. So there's another idea. And you can save your little bit of scraps you have on your fat quarters for using these little applique pieces that complement whatever you're making. Now, that being said, really quick, I do want to say, because we're talking about quilting on a budget here, how do you get your patterns and stuff without breaking the bank? They're online, a lot of them. You can get a lot of free quilting patterns online to print out. A thrift store is great for these little booklets. This little mug rug booklet right here, I believe I got for $1.99. So, people kind of get them and they use them, and they don't always keep them around after they've used them for a while. This one was lucky. It still had the applique patterns in them. This one was, I believe, 39 cents at a thrift store. It's a little booklet. And this big old booklet here, $1.99 at the thrift store. So there's an idea for acquiring some books and patterns on a budget. Another really nice reason to use fat quarters is if you have a fabric cutting machine. I happen to have an AccuQuilt. Actually, I have two. I have a Go Me and a Go, which is a regular size one, that takes these fabric cutting dies. This particular one, I believe, is 6 by 12. And what it is it's got the shapes on them, and it's got little cutting metal pieces in here. So what you would do is you would get your piece of fabric, and since it's a fat quarter, you don't have huge amounts of fabric you're trying to manipulate around this die. You're not making huge cuts and whatnot to a large piece of fabric. You can just lay your piece of fabric right over whatever part of the die you want. And this is cotton, and on an AccuQuilt I can actually cut 6 layers. So I can also just fan fold this into 6 layers, just like that. Run this whole thing through my fabric cutter. How easy is that? Because the fat quarter is already in a nice size. It's easy to fold over. You're not having huge bulks of fabric hanging over the side. You can put it long ways. I could have made 4 strips, 4 going this way, just about. If I was using one of my long strip cutters, I can do them 2 wide across a large strip cutter, and then I can put 3 fat quarters folded in half over it to make 6 strips, things like that. So if you're using a fabric cutter, fat quarters are just so much easier to manage. I also have them in the 6 by 6 blocks, which is about that big, which I use in my Go Cubes, which basically are just these preset boxes of all the different types of shapes you could make for classic patterns. And this fits really well over the half of that. So there's some reasons why you might want to use a fat quarter. Here is an example actually of a pattern book that goes with the Go Cube. So it's mix and match blocks and quilts for the 6, 8, 9, and 12-inch blocks using the AccuQuilt Go cutters. So it's really nice. It's got all these patterns for these different quilts, these different quilt patterns, and it shows you how to put them together. And basically, if you're using a 6-inch, 8-inch, 9-inch, or a 12-inch cube with all the different shapes in there, how much of each pattern, how much of each piece of fabric to use to put over it, and yada yada yada. So this is kind of nice to have if you're using a Go Cube system. But anyway, so basically that's my little tip of the day for using fat quarters and making your own fat quarters. So hopefully that helps and gives you some tips and ideas for quilting a little bit on a budget, or maybe even just quilting with some things that you never thought of using before. Till next time.